This is a Queen Bee Radio High School sports presentation.
Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup. It's now time to talk some of the big games that we had last week on our Queen Bee Radio family of stations, and we're joined by our sports director, Mark Evenstad, who got to call two very good games involving SWAL conference teams. Let's start off with the game that you had Friday night, Shark. It was the big one in the state of Wisconsin in regards to Division 4, with Mineral Point suffering their first loss of the season to Darlington, 72-60. Both teams now with one loss on their record. Those losses are to each other. And, looking at, how the game played out, it really kind of seemed like, listening to your call, it seemed like Darlington got in front and just kind of gradually built their lead as the game went along. Mineral Point did have some runs in them. Landon Thousand had himself a great game for the Pointers, but Darlington just had a little bit more firepower in the rematch from the first game. Talk about what you saw from both teams on Friday night and how that kind of compared to the first matchup of the season.
Well, even despite the fact that Darlington seemed to just grab the edge early on, Mineral Point just had a little brief lead here and there in the first half, like 9-7 and 12-11 and scores like that. But at halftime, Darlington took a 35-30 lead, and they stayed true to themselves throughout the game. And great balanced scoring from folks like Will Murray, Reagan Jackson, Carter Murray, Broker Busher. They provided the bulk of the scoring, plus they had contributions off the bench from Zeke Zuberbuehler and Tag Guiley, and they rode that on their way to the victory. Mineral Point, yes, they were pretty much themselves throughout the game, but there was just some little things that, fouls that were committed, turnovers that were committed. Landon Thousand had just really an outstanding game. They had contributions from 4 of their 5 players, but not much else. In fact, off the bench, they only had 2 bench points. And Coach Dan Burris had pointed that out after the game, is that, we need everybody. We need everybody to contribute something, whether it be scoring or rebounding or defense or something. All 5 starters and who's ever coming in off the bench, they all have to contribute something. And if the Pointers don't get that, then they're a little bit behind the 8 ball as far as competing with a school like Darlington.
Yeah, one of the things that Coach Burrison has mentioned multiple times, whether it's you or me, whoever's covering Mineral Point, he's mentioned that there isn't much of a drop-off when he has to go to his bench. And I'm looking at the stat line for Mineral Point. One of the players kind of stood out to me, Jackson Wendhausen, no points for him on his stat line in that game. And the game that I called against Southwestern, he was the leading scorer off the bench. He had 25 or 26 points in that matchup. And he's one of the top 3-point shooters, not just in our area, but in the entire state. He was one of the semifinalists, at least, in the 3-point contest that's put on by WIS Sports. And he was 0 for 2 from the 3-point line, according to the stats there. So a bit of a factor for Mineral Point that the bench production wasn't what they expected it to be, and that's probably the anomaly for them that led to their only loss so far in the season. Now let's look at the remaining games for both teams. Both teams very interesting schedules the rest of the way. Mineral Point goes to Potosi Monday night. They then host Cuba City, Fenimore, go to Riverdale, and then host Iowa Grant. Darlington plays West Salem at Prairie du Chien Monday night. Then they go to Iowa Grant, at Monroe, versus Southwestern, at Boscobel, and at Riverdale. So Mineral Point for the remaining conference games, Cuba City, Fenimore, Riverdale, Iowa Grant, all seem to be very winnable games based on how the conference has shaped so far. Darlington, their remaining conference games, against Southwestern, that'll be a tough test. Southwestern's been a scrappy team, over the last couple seasons. Then at Boscobel, at Riverdale, those are very much winnable games. Is there a scenario where you think that one of these teams can, do something to break the conference tie at the top, or is it kind of settled at this point that you think Mineral Point and Darlington are going to finish as co-champions in the SWAL?
Yeah, that's going to be a likely scenario, Tyler. Now, Southwestern, yes, scrappy team. Southwestern had the lead at halftime against Darlington over in Hazel Green. I don't see that scenario repeating itself. But still, Darlington won that game by rather handily with a big blast of scoring in the second half. But I just don't see Southwestern going to Darlington and pulling off some huge major upset. So I'm not going to see that out in any of the conference games. However, Darlington does play a very, very tough opponent coming up on Monday when they take on West Salem. That is as a result of a snow out for Lake City, Minnesota tournament they were supposed to play right toward the end of December. Big snowstorm came, wiped out that game. So then, in response to that, Darlington then scheduled West Salem, and they are a very good team. So Darlington will definitely be challenged in that game. And then they will play Monroe in a non-conference game. That game was actually supposed to be like the maybe the second, maybe the third game of the year, or maybe even the first. What happened there was Monroe was going deep into the football playoffs, and so they would not be ready to start basketball. Darlington went even deeper. They got into the state championship game. So they would not be ready for the basketball season. So they simply just moved that game to late in the season so that they could play that game. And Monroe, well, Monroe's had years where they're excellent, and they've had years where they're not very good. And I don't know which Monroe team will be showing up there, but again, you're talking about a little bit bigger school, and the two teams have played each other before in non-conference type scenarios. Don't know what you'll get out of the Cheesemakers this time around, except as you know that they'll be well coached, and they will be a tough out.
Yep, agreed. And one of the things that I kind of looked into after Friday night's game is what's the likelihood that Mineral Point and Darlington are going to see each other again in the postseason? And I decided to look at what the sectional pairings look like. And these are the teams that are in the same sectional as Mineral Point and Darlington. We have Belleville, Boscobel, Broadhead, Cuba City, Fenimore, Iowa Grant, Lancaster, Parkview, Riverdale, Westby, Wisconsin Heights. The interesting part about all of those teams is that they all have losing records as of this recording. So
yeah, I'm surprised by that. Yeah, I thought Belleville early in the season, Belleville looked like they were going to be a contender in the Capital Conference, I believe it is, and they even beat Cuba City earlier in the year. But henceforth, they've regressed. So in answer to your question, Tyler, I don't think any of them are going to be able to compete against Darlington or Mineral Point once the stakes get higher.
Yeah, I agree. It's hard to determine who the third best team is in that sectional. I mean, everyone's got a losing record. We talked earlier in the season, teams like Lancaster that got off to a hot start, they're a game under, 500 at this point. Fenimore had been a historically, pretty solid team over the last couple of years. They've had a, very significant drop off this year. Belleville, as you said, they've been, pretty good in boys sports in recent years. They're 2 games below 500. So it's hard to, kind of tell, is there anyone in that group that can, put up a fight against, Darlington or Mineral Point? I'm curious to see who's going to be the 1 and 2 as far as, Darlington, Mineral Point, but I don't know if it's necessarily going to matter. Those two are pretty much on a collision course, and we're probably going to see them in a sectional semifinal against Lancaster.
Out of the SWAL, Tyler, it would be Southwestern, but here's the rub. Southwestern is not in Division 4. They're in Division 5. Nobody's going to see them after this, which makes Southwestern a pretty good postseason team in Division 5.
Yeah, it's very intriguing, and I think that the path for both teams, I don't know if they're going to win out the rest of the regular season. There's a couple interesting games on the schedule for both teams the rest of the way, but once the postseason begins, I think that there's a pretty clear path for these two to meet in the sectional round with the stakes even higher. We'll keep tabs obviously on how well those two teams play out.
All right, and then the highest that the stakes could possibly get to then, Tyler, would be the sectional semifinal.
Right.
Not sectional championship, not even the state tournament. It would be the sectional semifinal at Lancaster. So keep a good sharp eye on that.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. It's one of those things where, you kind of hope that those two can, play at the Cole Center, but with the way that the geography works out and, how the WIAA does things, the sectional semifinal would be the round that these two would go head to head next. At least we think, based on seeding. The WIAA has done wonky things, but I don't see any reason why these two aren't going to be 1 and 2 in their half sectional.
Oh, yeah. And we've seen scenarios like this in previous years with Darlington and Cuba City, other scenarios with Mineral Point and Cuba City. Every year, it seems like they're meeting in either a regional championship game, which is actually a shame. It should be higher status, or in the sectional semifinal. But see, it doesn't get any further than that because you have to have another team out of another sectional face one of the teams out of the Mineral Point, Darlington, Cuba City sectional.
Yeah, it's crazy how it's starting to take shape, and that just kind of speaks to the things that Steve and I have talked about quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, that the teams that are really, really good are really, really good, and there's a very sharp drop off, between the top teams and the teams that are even in the middle and the lower part of the conferences. It's such a weird polarity this year among teams in the conferences in the area, and on both the boys and the girls side. It's very, very interesting how this season has played out. And again, we anticipate that Darlington and Mineral Point, barring injuries or something that would kind of derail either team, these two are on a collision course to meet in the sectional semifinal, and that game tentatively scheduled for Lancaster. I don't anticipate them moving it for geographic reasons. I expect that gym in Lancaster to be jam-packed, full of Pointers and Redbirds fans coming up in March.
Well, it would be fun. It would be kind of cool to speculate, to that and say, all right, we're going to put our eggs in one basket. We are going to count on those two teams playing in a sectional semifinal at Lancaster. But once you do that, that is a big mistake. You don't want to totally count on that happening because you'll get burned. So let's just sit back, relax, wait for the results to come out, and then we'll react to what it is and be prepared for the next great matchup.
Yeah, exactly. All right, let's move on to the girls' game that you had last Monday, Shark. Cuba City defeating Mineral Point in overtime, 69-61. Cuba City getting the win and now have a 2-game cushion in the SWAL with 3 conference games left on their schedule. The game on Monday night, Alexis Rundy with a double-double, 21 points and 11 rebounds, and Dee Christ also a double-double, 10 points and 12 rebounds. Cuba City's remaining schedule Monday night, we'll have that game on Extreme 107.1 against Platteville, non-conference action. Then Tuesday, they play at Basketball, and then the remaining games against Southwestern, at Prairie du Chien, which should be a really good game, and then at Darlington to close out the conference season, which, playing at Darlington, the Redbirds have had a very solid season on the girls' side in the SWAL. It felt like if Mineral Point was going to have a shot at the conference, they would have to beat Cuba City at home. They had Cuba City on the ropes. It took a shot at the buzzer at the end of regulation to force it to overtime, I believe. Talk about that game on Monday night, Shark. It seemed like from an outside perspective, this is a really bonkers basketball game, but the Cubans finding a way to knock off their conference rival.
Well, yeah, it went kind of according to plan early on. I think Cuba City had an 18-7 lead early on. And I kind of figured while doing it, saying, okay, here we go again. Cuba City's going to play with their food for a little while, and then, after that, devour them. But Mineral Point did not give in, and they pulled it within 27-19 at halftime. Well, then we get to the middle of the second half, and Mineral Point caught fire and grabbed the lead at 33-31. But Cuba City got a run going and built the lead back up to 10, but then Mineral Point would not go down without a fight. Typical Mineral Point girls basketball team. And they hung in there with Cuba City, and they had the lead at 59-56 in the closing minute. Mineral Point gets the basketball, and they called a timeout with around 7 seconds remaining. And I began speculating, okay, they're going to need a three. Who's going to take the three? Well, one option is Lacey Lindsay. She's a good player. She came into the game having knocked down 21 3-pointers. Man, she'd be a good choice. Well, how about Belle Waters? She came into that game having hit 10 3-pointers, and in this particular game, she had a couple of 3-point shots. Yeah, she might be a possibility. And then dawned on me that Jaden Schultz, a sophomore, she had 10 3-pointers coming into the game. And I took a look at that and I thought, she might not be a bad option, although she probably isn't going to be looked at by Cuba City as a threat. Well, they inbound the ball, and sure enough, you would think that Cuba City would foul, just foul on anything, because they needed 3 points. And if you foul them, then you put them at the free throw line for only a maximum of 2 free throws and 2 points. That might be a good strategy there. The only thing is that points spread things out just right so that you couldn't race over in time to foul in enough time. You're going to have, they're going to get that shot off. And lo and behold, they kind of had a triangle type of configuration, and they fired it over to Jaden Schultz in the deep right corner, caught it cleanly. Oh, just one nice, graceful look at the basket and shot, and went in at the buzzer, tied the game at 59, and we go to overtime. And I got to say, that's the first time that Cuba City has looked to have been challenged this season by a worthy opponent. Well, unfortunately, Mineral Point had run out of gas by this time, and they were outscored 10-2 in the overtime period. And you got to credit Cuba City for playing a really good game, and they were doing really good as far as defending Olivia Olson. She finished with 16, but boy, she had some great contributions from her teammates. Summer Rogers had 14, Alexis Rundy had 20, Dia Chris with 11. And then you had to even throw in Ashley Rowe, even though she only had 2 points. Her defense was very, very much a difference in the game. So credit Cuba City. When challenged, they answered the call. Credit Mineral Point for just expending all the energy that they had to try to pull out a win on Monday night.
Yep, so Cuba City, again, 10-0 in conference play, a 2-game cushion over Mineral Point in the conference standings. They got the 2 head-to-head wins. I guess from Mineral Point's perspective, Shark, you take Cuba City to overtime. And now, mind you, Cuba City now 15-4 overall. We've talked about the teams that they've lost to. They've lost to Beaver Dam, currently the number 4 ranked team in Division 2. They lost to Oregon, the number 2 ranked team in Division 1. They lost to Galena, the number 1 ranked team in Class 1A in Illinois, and then a loss to Arrowhead, the number 3 ranked team in Division 1. If there's any such thing as quality losses, those are probably the 4 best losses of any team probably in the state. You can make the case for that.
And I got to believe,
is this encouraging for Mineral Point?
I got to believe one of the criteria, and of course, remember, this is all computer generated. I got to believe one of the criteria is strength of schedule. And then, as you mentioned, quality losses. So take a look at the teams that they lost to, and, they're all really good teams. There's got to be some sort of factor in there for that. And if it is, these games, these losses are the perfect place to apply them.
Yeah, Mineral Point is 15-3 overall, and of course they have the 2 conference losses. Those losses to Cuba City. I was kind of curious about Mineral Point. Where they would be at, where change in head coach, change in philosophy. just a couple seasons ago, won the state title. But give credit to Mineral Point. They have had themselves quite the season, and they're still very much a dangerous threat in Division IV.
Oh yeah, no doubt. There's been seasons before, Tyler, in which Mineral Point would have 3 losses on the year. 3. All 3 of them to Cuba City. And there has been some seasons, and one was just a few years ago when Cuba City had just 3 losses. In fact, I think it was the year that Point went 30-0, their undefeated season. That was just a couple of seasons ago. I think Cuba City only had 3 losses that season. And again, they were all to Mineral Point. So those 2 teams know what it is, how to win and win in the postseason, and run into a buzzsaw named either Cuba City or Mineral Point, depending on the team that wins the state tournament that year.
Yeah, Mineral Point's 3 losses, 2 of them to Cuba City, and the other one to Prairie du Chien, which is not a bad team either in Southwest Wisconsin. So, I mean, 2 quality programs going head-to-head, a very entertaining and thrilling game that you got to see. I guess from your perspective, Shark, what do you make? Do you think that both Cuba City and Mineral Point probably favorites to make it to the sectional round? Is there anyone really in Division IV, looking at the SWAL or some of the area teams that they might possibly run into that might derail them potentially seeing each other in a sectional round, similar with the boys with Mineral Point and Darlington?
No, I really don't see that. Although there's a outside possibility that a school that we haven't even mentioned has a fantastic postseason and takes them out maybe in a regional championship game, possibly a sectional semifinal if it's not the opponent not being Cuba City or Mineral Point. Really can't think of anybody else around here that is equal to those programs. Maybe Galena. But once again, Don't have to worry about that. They play in a whole different state.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, Darlington girls, maybe, they've shown signs that they can hang with, Mineral Point and Cuba City, and Fenimore too. If they're playing, very good, that's a team that's had, a pretty nice, season as well. But, again, the couple games that I've seen where, Cuba City's played Fenimore, Cuba City did have the running clock against the Golden Eagles in Fenimore early part of the season. But, sometimes it's when you play a team too, that can be beneficial, and teams certainly are different in February than they are in, early to mid-December. But yeah, I think that it's pretty realistic that Cuba City and Mineral Point are going to see each other again. Likely either a regional final or a sectional semifinal, somewhere in there, depending on how the brackets and the seeding play out.
Yeah, it would take like an injury to a key player to slow them down just enough. But until that actually happens, you can only speculate. So we've already said we in boys we expect it to be Darlington and Mineral Point, and in girls we expect it to be Cuba City and Mineral Point when the stakes get really high.
That's what we expect, but we'll see how it all plays out. There's still quite a bit of basketball left to go, but the postseason looming around the corner. We'll see how Cuba City, Mineral Point, Darlington, all the teams in the SWAL finish out the rest of the season. Thanks, Shark, for joining us on this week's edition of the High School Sports Roundup, and we will have more after this on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Check out Subs.com. Subs is Southwest Wisconsin's go-to supplement store. Find all your favorite supplement brands at the best prices from local people. Fuel your fitness journey. Subs.com, your go-to supplement store with locations in Fenimore and Dubuque.
This week's highlight reel is presented by Subs.com.
Bickle with a record of 15 and 12. Hankey with the throw. Got the 2 takedown. He's going to get back points here, and he's going to get the ball. Good time of 25 seconds for Nolan Hankey. Just now he does. And we've got Drew on his back. Coach coming up with the ball. Needs to tighten it up, and there it is. In time of 1:23 for Damon Kraft. Schulte, and he's is able to get the takedown and near fall points, and close coming up with a pin. Here's Devin Tittering, and there was the pin in 45 seconds. Devin Tittering. Very aggressive for us a number of years ago. Now Lily working into a pinning combination here, and she's going to come up with the pin. Lock that cradle up again. Near fall criteria has been met. Close coming up with the fall, and there will be the fall. This time of 2:44 for Tyson Impop. Working on the right-hand side of Jana with a power half. And he's got the half. He's turned Jana on over. Maybe adjust just a little bit more, but doesn't need to. The pin time of 2:49 for Gavin Hinderman. Score 8-0. Seems a little single shot now. Laufenberg just drives right on through as far as making a tackle, like he would on the football field. And there's the ball. Pin time of 4:29 for Darren Laufenberg. And now off to the side and getting the turn now is Matt Orritt. Near fall criteria has been met. And there's the pin. Pin time of 4:54 for Matt Orritt. All right, an exhibition match. Ryan Shield from Mineral Point wrestling against Elliot Biba. Shield in on his second takedown attempt, and he's going to get another takedown. Shield working off to the side on a half Nelson. He's got Biba on his back. Working. Shield. And there is the ball.
That was awesome.
It is.
That was awesome. And he hits the gritty on the way out.
It's cool.
To the top to Graff, now to the left corner to Quick. Trent fires it for Sletton, and this one's poked away in the backcourt, stolen away by Hayful, and a left-handed scoop layup is good. Shannon Graff's pass is deflected and stolen away by Furlong, and a right-handed layup is good. From double team to the lane, kicks out to the right corner, three-pointer on the way, and knocks it down. L. Law. Shannon Graff now to Worley. Worley finds Braylon Quick, open three, left corner, back iron, no. Volleyball for the rebound, Shannon Graff able to collect it. Graff dribbles to the right corner, gives to Worley, loads up for three again, makes it again! 29-26, 10 seconds to play until halftime. Sletton pops it into Woodruff, right side of the paint, now back out to the right wing to Mason. 3 seconds left, Sletton, 2 seconds, puts up a shot, and the big shot goes in! To Worley in the right corner, another cross-court pass, Zinkel just to the left side of the paint, back to Sletton. Now Worley loads up for three again, splashes it! Inbound pass gets in. Left corner to Nevaeh Pauber. Three-pointer by Furlong, knocks it down. Graff looking for Sletton, ball poked away by Furlong, able to collect it just in front of the Galena bench. Furlong puts up a shot, gets a lucky bounce. And 7 points in the second half already as Furlong steals it, lobs it down low, and a nice finish for Eddie Hayful, and a timeout taken by Coach Ronnie Zinkel. Just like that, a 7-point lead for Galena.
Williams at the right wing, fakes the three. And now the left wing three goes up, bullseye for Timmerman. He looks, passes to the corner and Hinderman, and behind a screen for three. Bullseye for Hinderman. Left. In the first half, 2014 Cuba City. And the corner three. Bullseye for Hudson Keeler, 6-foot freshman, and he has just exceeded his average. And a timeout for Lancaster. Ball game's first with 9:01 left in the first half, with 3:05 left in the first half. And then the left-handed three, bullseye for Lance Ryder. And Ryder makes it 30-26. Dad Jamie is quite happy with that lead. And the lean-in shot does not go for Hermsen, and Vossen races back the other way. Fakes the shot, takes the shot, makes the shot. A Midwest One Bang Bang shot. He'll always hit him at the right wing. He'll put it up for three from there. Bullseye! And bringing it up now, Hermsen to the right wing. Hermsen will take it all the way in, but too hard on the shot. Griesbeck on the rebound, puts it in. And it's 43-38. 5-point Cubans lead with 7:10 left in the second half. As Timmerman, it tipped out of his hands, stolen by Vossen as Timmerman hit the floor. And now over at the right wing, a three, bullseye for Hinderman, and suddenly it's 50-38, and suddenly a timeout for Lancaster.
Back on the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup, and it is time to talk high school wrestling. We've had a big couple weekends in high school wrestling in Southwest Wisconsin. I'm joined by our Hall of Famer, Chuck Rasmussen. He was with us covering the SWC duels last Saturday, and then on the coverage as well for the SWC SWAL Clash this past Saturday. And Raz, let's start off with the SWC duels first, where heading into it, we were talking about how we anticipated Prairie du Chien to be the dominant team in that. They certainly were. In the 5 rounds of duels that they had with their conference opponents, only allowed to combine 67 points in those matchups. Prairie du Chien very much looked the part. It wasn't necessarily a surprise that Prairie du Chien won, but I think the dominance, the question that you posed to me was, were they going to allow 100 points, right, at most? But allowing 67, doesn't matter who you're facing. That's pretty darn impressive when you wrestle, 5 competitors in one single day.
Yes, as you say, I don't think it was a surprise to anybody there as far as Prairie du Chien dominating the tournament. And the rest of it, those 5 matches or the other schools, they could, I think, wrestle each other a number of times, and it's not going to come out the same way that it did. But those are some good dual meets too. But yeah, Prairie du Chien, they walked away with everything. And again, not to anybody's surprise. I mean, they're ranked number 2 in Division II, so they should have probably did what they did.
Yeah, they certainly looked the part, showed why they're the number 2 ranked team in Division II, and that led into what we had this past weekend on Saturday at the SWC SWAL Clash, one of, if not the most anticipated conference meets of the season in the state of Wisconsin. It's always been, one of the top meets in the season in the state of Wisconsin. Heading into it, depending on which rankings you looked at, I think it was Wisconsin Grappler had 32 wrestlers ranked in the top 7 in each weight class, and I believe Wisconsin Wrestler and Rockfin had 44 wrestlers ranked in the top 10 in those areas. Obviously, Fenimore, Iowa Grant, Highland 1 and 2 ranking in Division III. We just talked about Prairie du Chien being ranked in Division II, but man, there were some weight classes that were loaded, and some really cool, dare we say, fantasy matchups in a sense, where you have some Division II teams going up against Division III wrestlers that this would be potentially the last chance that they would see each other, and having got to listen to our coverage on 97.7 Country this past Saturday, just hearing the crowd and seeing pictures of it. It was a great environment, a great day of high school wrestling. And the big thing that stood out, Iowa Grant Highland wins the tournament. Prairie du Chien finishes 2nd. Fenimore finishes 3rd. I thought the results overall team-wise was very interesting, but you were there, you saw it from start to finish. What were kind of the immediate takeaways from the clash this past Saturday?
Well, I think the top 3 teams were the top 3 teams that anybody with, knowledge of the conferences, that's what they would have guessed. What order it was, well, that was up for grabs. But Iowa Grand Highland put a very nice tournament together. They ended up with 2 champions, but they had 10 medalists yesterday, and 10 along with Prairie du Chien. Prairie du Chien had 10 also, and that was your first and second place teams there yesterday. Fenimore was right behind. Fenimore had 4 champions and 9 place winners, and so those are your top 3 teams. And again, I don't feel a surprise to pretty much anybody. Some great individual matches, and as you said, I mean, it was a really a cool setting there. Or warm setting, whichever. It was nice and warm there in the gym. Very, very knowledgeable, very loud crowd at times. It was good. And I do say, we said it before, that it is probably the best conference tournament in the state of Wisconsin. So it's a good one, and it proved that yesterday.
Yeah, you could just tell by looking at the pictures and just the way that the sound of the crowd came off on the radio on Saturday. There were a lot of people there. It was very well attended, and I have to imagine probably one of the most electric atmospheres that you would get. You don't necessarily always get that, in postseason tournaments or even sometimes at the Kohl Center in those earlier sessions. I mean, this was, really, the cream of the crop as far as, best wrestling, that we have. Like I said, I think it was a bit of a surprise with Iowa Grand Highland winning. And I know that you and Scott Tolzman were talking about it during the pre-match. Who do you think would win if you had to put money on it, which we don't encourage people to do, but if you were to put money on it, Scott said Iowa Grand Highland, and I thought that was interesting just because Iowa Grand Highland, in dual meets, they've lost to Prairie du Chien twice, and they've lost to Fenimore, albeit they were very competitive, dual meets in all 3 meetings that Iowa Grand Highland has had amongst those 2 teams. But Iowa Grand Highland winning, was that as much of a surprise to you as far as them being number 1? I know you said 1 through 3 could go either way, but was Iowa Grand Highland winning probably the least, I don't want to say the least predicted scenario that would have happened?
I would say no. Again, we've been able to watch them a couple times, and they're solid. The ones that didn't medal, and medaling means you were in the top 5 in the conference. But they had several others that were probably in the 6th, 7th, and 8th spots, and those are points. And again, to win the clash, it takes a whole team effort. Well, and you talk about that Dodgeville, if they're studs there to start into the lineup, I think they had the 3 champions there, at 106, 113, and 120, but they ended up 9th out of the 13 teams. So, you need your studs, but you need depth and quality all the way through. And that's, those top 3 teams, they have that.
Absolutely. Again, Iowa Grand Highland winning with a combined team score of 266 points. Prairie du Chien 2nd place with 228, and Fenimore in 3rd place with 224. And again, that's the final conference meeting. And we should also mention, too, that on Friday night, there was the first ever girls SWC SWAL Clash, and the Lancaster Flying Arrows winning the inaugural girls team title. Talk a little bit about the Flying Arrows girls. They had a pretty impressive showing on Friday night as well.
Well, they did. They ended up, as you said, they are the first women's conference champion as far as clash-wise. There were, I'm going to say, 25, 30 ladies there that were competing. Lancaster had 5 of them, and they came out on top with a team score of 67 points. River Valley was second with 51. I believe 9 of the schools had representatives in the women's tournament, and I think you're going to continue to see it grow. So pretty neat. Congratulations to Lizzie Dressler and her crew there, as far as Lizzie, the girls coach. And so congrats and good luck as they go down the road too. So,
yep.
See them at sectionals.
Yeah, we got to see, especially during the SWC duels, we got to see the Lancaster girls compete against the boys, and I remember distinctly Olivia Ball from Lancaster. She was wrestling, and she ended up losing the match that she had in the final round. I believe it was against River Valley, and she gutted it out. There were a couple blood stoppages. I believe she had like a bloody nose or something like that, and she kept Lancaster in that dual meet against River Valley. She didn't, get pinned, and had it set up for Lancaster to have a chance to take that one against River Valley. And if you can, hold your own against some, tough competition, from the guys' side, that certainly helps your cause as you head down your own path, individually for the girls' side, for postseason.
Yeah, interesting too that Emma Haiti,
yep.
Yeah, from Richland Center, chose to compete in the tournament yesterday instead of the tournament on Friday night there with the rest of the ladies there. So, and she ended up placing 7th. So that was a good showing for her too, and good experience and good competition.
I believe she opened with a pin to begin the action on Saturday as well, if I remember correctly. I believe she got a pin in her first match in that one.
Yeah, you're probably correct, but it was good to see.
Good deal. So moving ahead, we now have the regional round coming up on Saturday. We have Division II and Division III coverage on our Queen Bee Radio family of stations. Let's look at Division III first, which we will have on 97.7 Country WGLR from Mineral Point. The teams competing locally in Mineral Point on Saturday, we will have Boscobel, DeSoto, Fenimore, Iowa Grant Highland, Ithaca Weston, Kickapoo Lafarge Youth Initiative, Lancaster, Mineral Point, North Crawford, Seneca, Parkview, Albany, Peck, Argyle, River Ridge, and Riverdale. And, just looking at that, Raz, obviously, we're assuming that Fenimore and Iowa Grant Highland are going to be the two teams that come out of that regional. But looking at, maybe some of the weight classes or some of the things that we're looking to see in that regional, what are the things that stand out to you the most as we look towards our first regional rounds coming up on Saturday?
Well, to be very honest with you, I haven't taken the time yet to kind of study much of that then too, other than, you got the local teams there, the conference teams that we follow all the time. And so I do expect that Fenimore and Iowa Grant Highland will come out number 1 and number 2 out of there. Mineral Point had a nice showing this past weekend. They ended up 4th overall, so expect them to be in there on the fight too. Riverdale's got a nice team there, and Riverdale defeated, I believe, Mineral Point in a dual meet, and so they're going to be right in there too. They'll have a number of individuals that will qualify for sectionals, as will several of the other teams. So it should be fun. It should be a good one. And then, then we look ahead to a week from Tuesday night. That will be the team sectional, and that'll be held at Fenimore. And I think, I'm very confident in saying La Crosse Aquinas will be one of the teams that will be back in there again. And then I don't know who to pick from there. If it will be Pittsville. Pittsville was the team that qualified last year and got whumped on in the very first round there at team sectionals. And honestly, if them or the other team that I think might be in the equation might be Royal and Wanawak Center. But I do firmly believe whichever of those teams behind Aquinas make it, they'll probably get things handed to them again, just like last year. So, but it should be a great one.
Yeah, we just hope that it's Fenimore and Iowa Grant Highland on opposite sides of the bracket if it gets to the team sectionals. That way it is a meeting for the sectional final. I can't even imagine what that gym's going to be like if it's those two neighboring schools, conference rivals, going head to head for a chance to go to state. That is going to be one electric atmosphere, but we'll see how things do shake out after the Division III regionals from Mineral Point on Saturday. We'll have that on 97.7 Country WGLR. Then over on Extreme 107.1, we will have the Division II regional from Dodgeville. The teams competing from there, Sugar River, the tri-up of Belleville, Monticello, and New Glarus, Belmont-Platteville, Broadhead, Judah, Columbus, Cuba City, Benton Southwestern, Darlington Blackhawk, Dodgeville, Edgerton, Evansville, Lodi, Monroe, Portage, and River Randolph. So looking at that regional, there are 2 ranked teams in there. Lodi ranked number 4, Evansville ranked number 6 in the state. I had asked you before we jumped on if there were any local teams that you think might pose a threat to potentially dethroning one of those 2 for one of our local teams to advance to the team sectional, which would be at River Valley. And the one that you mentioned was Darlington Blackhawk. Talk a little bit about what you've seen from their wrestlers from the Clash and what we've seen from them throughout the season.
Well, they placed 5th at the Clash last weekend, and they've got some very, very good wrestlers. They had 6 guys that did place or did medal, and I would very much enjoy seeing them sneak into, if you want to call it that, the sectional team championship too. So I think you picked the other 2, Evansville and Lodi. I think Lodi probably will win it, but you never know. You have a flu bug come through, an injury or 2, and somebody gets upset. It could happen. So those
someone doesn't make weight.
Right.
Something weird, happens. Yeah.
Yep. And then I look at the other team sectional there up at Richland Center. I think you got to have Prairie du Chien as your top choice there, and then behind them, I see GET Melrose Mindoro as far as the second place finisher there. So some good wrestling coming up the next 4 weekends.
Oh, yep, absolutely. And yeah, we're coming off the Clash, what an electric atmosphere it was at Mineral Point, and we will be there again next week. Again, Mineral Point hosting the Division III regionals. We'll have coverage of that on 97.7 Country WGLR, and then Division II regionals from Dodgeville on Extreme 107.1, and technology permitting on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel, as well as we are now firmly underway in our postseason coverage for high school wrestling. What a fun regular season it's been. A very fun conference clash between the SWC and the SWAL. And we are full steam ahead for, as you said, 4 consecutive weekends of some excellent high school wrestling from our area wrestlers. Thank you, Raz, for joining me for our high school wrestling coverage. And we'll have more on the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup after this on YouTube and SoundCloud.
Grow your business by enhancing your digital marketing efforts with Queen Bee Radio and Phase 3 Digital. We provide customized solutions based on your business's unique needs, including targeted advertising, website development, and search engine optimization. Contact us at 608-349-2000 or visit p3da.com/Platteville to learn more.
Back on the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundups. Now time to talk about the conferences in Southwest Wisconsin for boys basketball and Northern Illinois at that. And we're joined by our Platteville/Galena truther, Steve Prestegard, who will start off with the SWC because Platteville, the token Platteville truther, the Hillmen have clinched at least a share of the SWC conference title. They are sitting at 7-0 in conference play, 14-3 overall. Platteville seems to be continuing to play well and have certainly asserted themselves as the top team is in the SWC with a couple weeks remaining in the season. Talk about the Hillmen, and was this kind of expected, at the beginning of the season? And are we kind of anticipating Platteville to have a pretty solid postseason run as well?
Well, those of us in Platteville certainly hope so. It's simply, they're just the most complete team in the SWC, basically. They've got, for one thing, they've got a 6'9" player. And you remember, Chandler Batchelor, who was 7'2", played for Dodgeville. Well, he's gone, which means it's very difficult to defend against him. But he's not even necessarily the best player on that team. I would argue that that's Lucas Ludlam, who probably, I think I've said this before, could play any position on the floor and not embarrass himself in the process. But in addition to that, they've got two players who were bench players last year now are starting and are scoring and playing defense consistently. Davin Edge and Simon Babel. Garrison Tasher is back at point guard. And they have another player who has come in and replaced the bench role that Babel and Edge had last year, and that's Myron Ryder. He comes in and the energy level increases. And he actually had to start at the start of the year because Garrison Tasher was out with an injury. So he's, he got a lot of valuable experience early in the season, and now he's coming off the bench and he's really providing a spark. And they've got a couple other players who also are providing a spark on the bench. So I think that's the reason that Platteville is, they have parts that are difficult to deal with, like a 6'9" center. But on the other hand, they're also the deepest team, I think, probably by far in the Southwest Wisconsin Conference. And you look at who their losses are to, we talked about this before. Well, Darlington, Mineral Point, they have one loss each to each other. And Monona Grove's a Division II team. So, and this week, interestingly, on Tuesday, they got a big non-conference game win that I think didn't get a huge amount of notice. They beat Mount Horeb, and Mount Horeb, I think, is ranked ranked, I think, 10th in Division II. That was a huge win for them.
Right.
They have a game Thursday against Prairie du Chien. At this point now, it's Prairie du Chien who might be the best team of the rest of the SWC at this point. But Platteville's clearly the class of that conference.
Yeah, one of the matchups that we didn't have a chance to talk about since our last episode was Platteville's win over Potosi, where we thought that was a very interesting matchup going into it. Platteville winning that one 62-46, 16 points apiece for Lucas Ludlam and Zach McLean in that matchup for Platteville. And, this kind of bridges between our SWC and Six Rivers West coverage a bit, because Platteville taking care of business against a Potosi team that's played very well through most of the season, although now Potosi kind of going in a downward direction at this point in the season, now lost to River Ridge and Platteville. Again, those are, pretty solid teams, but still very much, with Platteville, they're still trending in the right direction. They have a share of at least the conference title, and they do have some interesting games, like you said, coming up, Thursday against Prairie du Chien, but there's also a non-conference matchup against New Glarus, which has a very good record. Wisconsin Dells, undefeated in conference play. That's coming up on the 19th. Edgewood, granted they're 4-14, but Edgewood has been a school that Platteville seems to run into every single postseason in every sport. So I don't know if that's going to be a primer of something to see in the postseason, but yeah, Platteville playing good basketball at this point in the season, and the first team to clinch at least a share of the conference title in our area. Congrats to the Hillmen, and they have a game coming up Monday night at Cuba City on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. You've gotten a chance to see both Platteville and Cuba City. Any particular matchups or things that we should look for on that game Monday night between these two?
I think what is going to be interesting is to see how Cuba City deals with the inside game that Platteville's able to bring. You got Henry Cruiser for Cuba City. He's a good player, but he's not a huge player as far, he's not 6'6" even. And I know they're looking forward to playing Cuba City on Monday or playing Platteville on Monday, because that's what they told me the post game on Friday. But that's not going to be easy, obviously, for those teams. The other thing is the Gard combination, because you have Tyson Richard and you have Miles Hinderman for Cuba City. They're good, but they're going to have their hands full with the guards for Platteville. This is going to be a game that they will be playing a team that is probably the caliber of Darlington and Mineral Point. So I think from Cuba City's perspective, it's really going to help them to get ready for the postseason. And it's going to be a good test for Platteville also because, simply because their players are pretty good. And it's playing on the road. Cuba City is never an easy place to win, as everybody who comes in and then leaves with a loss knows. So that's going to be a good game Monday night.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing that one. Platteville at Cuba City on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel on Monday night. And then the Cuba City boys will go to Prairie du Chien on Tuesday night. Very interesting matchup in non-conference action. That will also be on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Boys basketball Thursday night, Dodgeville at Lancaster on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Let's move into the Six Rivers West, where things are starting to get a little bit interesting because Potosi suffered that loss to River Ridge a couple weeks ago, and now River Ridge has officially inserted themselves as the second place team in the conference after they defeated Shullsburg last week. And you saw Potosi against Platteville, Steve. Potosi kind of trending a little bit downward. They have a couple recent losses, and River Ridge starting to get hot. They were 8-0 in the month of January. So they're playing their best basketball, and Potosi has a big matchup coming up on Thursday against Shullsburg at Shullsburg, where, it seems likely that a Shullsburg win would put Potosi and River Ridge in a tie at the top of the conference, whereas Potosi has an opportunity to win the conference outright. What do you make of the Six Rivers West? It's starting to get a little bit more competitive, and maybe more competitive than we originally thought, maybe just a couple weeks ago.
Well, here's what I think about the Six Rivers West. 6-1. That is what the Six Rivers West did against the Six Rivers East on Friday in the crossover game. So I think it's pretty obvious that you could put any Six Rivers West team up against their companion in the Six Rivers East, and that is exactly what happened. They went 6-1. I think last year, if I'm not mistaken, Six Rivers West went 7-0, and they were playing at all the Six Rivers East teams. So, that's a better conference head to toe, perhaps, than I think a lot of people might think. Even a team like Benton, which has struggled this year, but I saw them play against Highland on Tuesday, and what I was impressed with is that they didn't fold it. They were down the whole game, basically. They had Highland had a run and got the lead in the first half, but Benton never quit playing the entire basketball game. That's the last place, close to last place team in the conference. That's pretty impressive, I think, that a team that, and I talked to Lou Tyson, the Benton coach, and he said that, they've struggled this year. That's obvious based on the record, but they haven't given up. They're still playing hard and all of that. And that's a good thing that, coach obviously likes to see, particularly with a team that had to replace as many players as Benton did last year, as a very young team, a very inexperienced team at this point. But, as far as Potosi goes, they're going to be playing Mineral Point this week. They will not be favored, but hardly, if you look at Potosi and their losses, lose to Darlington, lose to Platteville. Well, Darlington and Platteville are on top of their conferences. They're playing Mineral Point. They're tied for first. River Ridge, well, obviously they've turned it around basically in the whole month of January, and that's a conference arch rival. So I don't think, if you look at Potosi, that they've got what you consider a bad loss in any of that stretch. They did not play well at all in the second half against River Ridge, which is why they lost. But they're still. I would still put Potosi up against. I hate to denigrate the Ridge and Valley yet again, but at this point, I would put Potosi up against a team like North Crawford or Ithaca, in the Ridge and Valley, which are obviously potential playoff opponents for Potosi or anybody else in the Six Rivers West.
Yeah, and looking at the remaining schedule for Potosi, as you said, they get Mineral Point at home on Monday night, which, Mineral Point coming off the loss to Darlington, I would anticipate that they're going to try and bounce back and get the momentum going their way. Thursday night at Shullsburg, where that's probably the last opportunity for a Six Rivers team to knock off Potosi, because the remaining games are against Cassville, which is 2-6 in conference play, Benton, which is 0-8, Highland at 5-4. They've been kind of hit or miss. When they're on, they're really, really good, and when they're off, they're really, really off. So, we'll kind of see how things shake out for Potosi the rest of the way. Just looking at the remainder of River Ridge's schedule, and they will have DeSoto Monday night, Boscobel on Friday night in non-conference action, then Benton, Belmont, and Cassville. All of them are certainly winnable games for the Timberwolves, but you still have to play the games, and we know what happens sometimes when we anticipate and try and project to see what's going to happen. Weird stuff tends to happen, but the Six Rivers West, far from decided just yet, but the matchup Thursday night between Potosi and Shullsburg, a big one to decide how the conference is going to finish, and we will have that game Thursday night on Extreme 107.1. Looking at the NUI West, looking at the conference standings right now, East Dubuque in first place with a 7-1 conference record. They're 15-11 overall. Galena in the number 2 spot, 7-2 with a 17-10 record. Then our friends at Scales Mound, 5-3 in conference play, 19-7 overall. And we kind of talked about this during our last episode, Steve, where, winning the conference games are the games that you need to win. And, East Dubuque, Galena, Scales Mound certainly doing that, but the overall records seem to be a bit skewed, and it might be just different levels of competition or just the different tournaments that that they're in. But NUI West shaping out to be a very interesting conference down the home stretch of the season.
A whole lot more interesting, I think, than a lot of people thought it was going to be, because the people that are, most people probably thought, well, Scales Mountain will win again. Well, turns out East Dubuque and Galena had a different opinion on that subject. And it's interesting, what has happened exactly. And East Dubuque, for one thing, is a team that is greater than the sum of the parts, because, among other things, East Dubuque has hardly any height at all. Their tallest player comes off the bench. He's 6'2", and he's really not an inside player. So they got guys who are like 5'10", 5'11", and 6 feet playing inside and more than holding their own. So that is, that's what stands out, I think, about East Dubuque. Galena, of course, they have one of the best players in the area in Cooper Glasgow. You have a kid who's shooting in the low 20s for points per game, and he's 6'6". Well, that tells you right there. Those are, coaches love to have players like that, obviously. And, Scales Mound, they've done well non-conference, but the conference games have turned out to be a little more of a challenge. They got beat by Galena, whatever night that was, Thursday night, I think that was. Mm-hmm. They also lost on Saturday, although that's hardly one to carp about, because they got beat by Glenbard West. Glenbard West has over 2,000 students, and remember, Scales Mountain went to Glenbard West last year for a game, and this was the repeat game on Saturday, and they held their own until they just kind of ran out of gas against a much bigger, school. So that's probably a game that's not really going to hurt Scales Mountain as far as the postseason goes. But coming up actually next Friday will be the Illinois boys seedings, and that's going to be really interesting to see how everybody comes out in there, and particularly Galena and East Dubuque, they're playing on the 15th. That is their last regular season game. And then after that, and by the way, that will be the 4th time that those two teams have played this year. And nobody would be surprised if they end up playing number 5 in the postseason at some point.
Yeah, very intriguing how that NUI West is playing out. And yeah, the postseason for Illinois just around the corner. The seedings will be coming out on Friday, like you said. Very curious to see where those top 3 teams in particular end up being seeded and what the path is going to look like for them during the postseason run. Let's look over to the Six Rivers East. Argyle and Barneveld tied for the conference lead at 7-1. They have a game against each other coming up on Thursday night. Barneveld goes to Argyle to decide who's going to be in sole possession of first place in the Six Rivers East. And then the Ridge and Valley. Ithaca and North Crawford with identical 8-1 conference records and overall records at 16-2. North Crawford losing consecutive games. They lost to Southwestern and to Ithaca on back-to-back games. So North Crawford has been one of those top teams, one of the ranked teams in Division 5, but Ithaca now also ranked and getting the better of North Crawford. Ridge and Valley, very competitive, at least the top two teams there. What do you make of the Six Rivers East and the Ridge and Valley teams that are at the top of the conference, Steve?
Well, the Six Rivers East is better than it was a couple of years ago, when the only team that had a winning overall record was the conference champ, and the only team that won a playoff game was a team playing another team. So they're better than that. Their win-loss records are decent. I still don't think that they're better than, obviously, the Six Rivers West, but if you get into a one-game situation, as happens in the postseason, who knows what's going to happen. Ithaca and North Crawford really have come out of nowhere. I'm not sure that they were really, I haven't seen the preseason rankings to check, but I don't know that they were considered to be two of the better teams, but obviously they are two of the better teams in the area. And that's going to be really interesting to see what they do in the postseason. Because, you look in Division 5, in this half of the sectional, you've got Potosi and River Ridge, probably, at or near, obviously they'll get very high seeding, but so will Ithaca and North Crawford, but so will, possibly Argyle and or Barneveld. And then there's the matter of Southwestern, which is in third place right now in the SWAL. So the Division 5 postseason is going to be really interesting to see how the matchups are, independent of how the games take place.
Yeah, and the way that the Division 5 sectionals are grouped is a little bit different, because they're not all going to be necessarily the same half sectional, or even in the same sectional bracket. Some are going to be in sectional 3, some in sectional 4. I know Southwestern isn't going to be in the same grouping as Potosi or River Ridge, which is very interesting, because those are Southwestern having gone against Potosi in back-to-back years, once in the sectional semifinal and then again in the regional final last year at Potosi. Now that the Division 5 sectionals are a little bit different, and River Ridge again dropping from Division 4 to Division 5 makes things a little bit more interesting, especially with River Ridge playing some of their best basketball as of late. I think Division 5 is absolutely loaded as far as teams from our area that have a chance. It's just who plays who and when are they going to play each other, and how are the seedings going to be determined, because there's been discussion about how the formula is determined, and there is some weights against how you've played more recently as opposed to how you've played at the beginning of the season, which makes things a little interesting, where is there a scenario where if River Ridge and Potosi are tied, for, the conference at the end of the season, does River Ridge end up being a higher seed than Potosi, even though the overall record might favor Potosi a little bit? I think it's very interesting how this is going to pan out, and I think that there's still some stuff that might happen. There's certainly some unexpected things that could disrupt what we think might happen over these next few weeks, but very interesting how the boys basketball side of things have played out and will play out in the remaining parts of the season. Looking at the schedule. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Most definitely. I was just looking at the Division 5 field in that the sectional that Southwestern is in, and I have to think that the The two teams that are going to come out of that half sectional bracket are probably going to be Southwestern and then Madison Abundant Life. They are a team that has it's like, where'd these guys come from? But they are right now ranked 4th, believe it or not, in Division 5. And I would have to think that one of those teams in that bracket is probably going to be the favorite, because I don't see anybody in the other half bracket. I'm just real quickly looking here that looks like, oh boy, they're going to be tough to beat. So if I had to bet, I would have to think that probably it's going to be Southwestern has had to play Mineral Point and Darlington, and they've had to play other not quite as good teams but decent teams also. Cuba City is an example of that. So and of course they've got the non-conference game against North Crawford. So that is going to be if I had to bet money, I would have to say that it's either going to be Madison Abundant Life or Southwestern. And I guess we'll see how good Madison Abundant Life's schedule is if they end up playing Southwestern, because we know how good Southwestern's schedule has been.
Yeah, and we're not going to gamble money because it is high school sports, so we won't,
Right.
absolutely do that. But some big games coming up on our Queen Bee Radio family of stations this week. Again, Monday night, Platteville at Cuba City, non-conference action on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Tuesday night, Cuba City at Prairie du Chien in non-conference action, also on Super Hits 106 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Thursday night, Dodgeville at Lancaster on 97.7 Country, WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Cuba City at Mineral Point on Super Hits 106, and Potosi at Schellsburg. That big matchup that we were talking about in the Six Rivers West will be on Extreme 107.1. And that wraps up our boys basketball coverage for this week. But Steve and I will be back to talk about the girls basketball side of things on the state of Wisconsin and the Illinois girls playoff seedings coming out. We'll talk about that coming up on the High School Sports Roundup on YouTube and SoundCloud. This One-on-One with the Great One interview is presented by People's State Bank.
Looking for a checking account with no monthly requirements or service charge? People's State Bank's People's Checking Account is just what you're looking for. This account includes free debit card, online and mobile banking, bill pay, and much more at no cost to you. You heard that right. No cost to you. We're your local community bank ready to serve you. People's State Bank. Member FDIC.
We're very happy to be joined by UW-Platteville men's basketball coach Jeff Gard, one of the creators of Guarding Against Cancer. Thanks for joining us. I have to believe you got to be really happy with how this thing has taken off in the 9 years or so that this has been going on.
Well, it couldn't be more pleased, and I think the biggest thing is that we talk about this kind of follow Dad's vision.
Yeah.
And obviously, like I stated in the speech as well, Dad spent 40 years working at a company that now is Computer Financial, but by the time Dad finished working for that company, it changed names 3 times. And actually went back to the original name of it as well. So from PCA to Badgerland Farm Credit.
Yeah.
It just constantly changed names. But Dad's whole vision and growing up in Southwest Wisconsin, he was always about thinking globally but working locally. And what better way for GAC to operate that same vision of, hey, we want to find a cure for a disease that is a worldwide disease, but we're going to find it right here in our own backyard in Madison as well. So the opportunity to have all the funds for GAC go directly to the Carbone, it's going to find the cure for it here in Madison. And then obviously there's some extensions off of that with the local cancer coalitions as well that we work directly with as well, from the Grant County Cancer Coalition, Iowa County Cancer Coalition, and then Lafayette Relay for Life as well.
Yeah, it's tremendous how it's really taken off. I did years ago, like 15 years ago, I did hockey, college hockey for a year, and the mother of the coach was a breast cancer survivor, so we did that sort of thing. So that was like 15 years ago, but to the scope, how things have just grown in terms of the research and getting, everybody involved with these things. And there are even some schools, we were in East Dubuque last week, they don't do a cancer thing specifically, but they've got their Warrior Strong thing 2 years ago.
Correct.
They did it for a graduate of East Dubuque who had cancer, who was being treated for cancer. So,
well, it is, and I think obviously a while ago, 15 years ago, like you say, everybody knew about cancer, but it wasn't kind of in the front, and now it's just kind of taken off. And I can remember the year that Dad was diagnosed, we were at our Coaches versus Cancer, which is a nationwide organization. But I remember going at that event that we had in Madison that year, and the speaker saying, stand if you've been personally touched by cancer. And Greg and I are kind of sitting by each other, and neither one of us stood up. Ironically, about a month later, 2 months later, here we get punched in the face with it. We go through it, and I think it's an opportunity to take the stage that you're on to try to help others, and that's what Dad was about. And since that time, our mom has gone through breast cancer, survivor. We're glad to say
that's great.
She's back, and she's running around at gyms all over now, chasing Greg and I's teams, as well as my brother Gary's kids as well. But again, I mean, it's these stages that you're on to be able to help out. I know, obviously tonight, like I said, Cuba Cities was one of the ones 5 years ago that started this. Now the state of Wisconsin has really stepped up at the high school level to have these type of events across the state, and then the money going back to GAC. Next Wednesday, just to put a plug in for us, next Wednesday, February 7th, we're at home versus Oshkosh, and it's our second Yarding Against Cancer night that we're going to have. We had one last week. We raised about $2,300. Again, that money is going to go to GAC, but also I put it back to the cancer coalitions in Grant County, Iowa County, and Lafayette as well, so it stays close to home. We'll have another night like that next Wednesday as well, with plans to do the same thing. So those that are maybe not able to make it tonight, listening to the game next Wednesday night, come on out for a pretty good college basketball game as well at 7 o'clock.
Cool.
Bull Ryan Court.
And by the way, we're on YouTube too, so
there you go.
You're worldwide now. So speaking of that, how is your team doing at this point? It seems like you're winning much more often than losing. We've
been fortunate to be in the left-hand column quite a bit this year. We got 3 losses on the season. 2 of the losses to two teams that are ranked nationally in the top 25. And obviously Keene State, a team out of New York early in the year, and then we lost to Trine, who's I think right now top 10 team in the country. We just took our first conference loss of the year last Wednesday. Got beat on a buzzer beater to a good Stevens Point team. But sitting pretty good right now in the conference where we're at. But know that we just hit. Saturday was the second half of the conference play as well. So we just got a big win at La Crosse, who was a team that was 2 games behind us, and now we've extended that lead a little bit, but some big games to come up down the stretch.
All right, here's the inside joke. I'll take a Subway club and then pasta with the marinara sauce
Exactly,
afterwards.
right? Yeah, you've been with us too long that obviously those road trips with Subway pregame meals and postgame meals and some pizza as well. So
and seeing college-age demographic movies also, but
it's
that was a blast. It really was.
Now having 2 younger kids as well, that one of them likes to travel with us a little bit, I have to tell our managers, let's make sure they're age-appropriate movies that we have on the bus. Otherwise, I tell them, here's the headphones, here's your iPad, watch it. Don't pick your head up.
In other words, the Wolf of Wall Street will not be
that one doesn't usually make the trip anymore. I kind of nixed that one as well. So
all right, well, it's great to see you, and again, great to see all of this.
Yes, exactly.
Regarding cancer,
it's so appreciative. I mean, just the state of Wisconsin in general. That's who we are, Midwest ties, and obviously, that opportunity to help those out that are going through a little bit of a fight and try to make some things a little bit easier for them down the road.
All right, great to see you
Appreciate
again.
It. Thanks.
Jeff Gard, the UW-Platteville men's basketball coach.
Looking for a checking account with no monthly requirements or service charge? People's State Bank's People's Checking Account is just what you're looking for. This account includes free debit card, online and mobile banking, bill pay, and much more at no cost to you. You heard that right. No cost to you. We're your local community bank ready to serve you. People's State Bank, member FDIC.
Time to talk girls basketball now on the Queen Bee Radio High School Sports Roundup. I'm rejoined by Platteville/Galena truther Steve Prestegard, and we're going to go start with the SWC, where Platteville is in first place in the SWC in the win column, a 7-1 conference record, just ahead of Prairie du Chien with a 6-1 conference record. Dodgeville not that far behind with a 5-2 conference record. The conference itself continues to be competitive, but the Hillman, with just a couple games left, they have probably the easier schedule of the teams that are still at the top of the conference. Got to like Platteville's chances to close out the conference.
Yeah, in their last two games in the next 2 weeks, let's just say they will be favored in both. Prairie du Chien and Dodgeville, they have not played yet this season, and they will be playing Saturday in Prairie du Chien and then the following Thursday in Dodgeville. So one of those two teams, whoever sweeps, will end up tied most likely for first. But if the two teams split, then Platteville will win the title by itself. Because assuming there isn't some massive upset for the Hillman on the wrong side of it in the next couple of weeks, but given how things have gone at this point, it really does look like they're half of the title at least.
In Platteville with their remaining schedule coming up. They have Cuba City on a Monday night. We'll have that game on Extreme 107.1 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Then on Tuesday, they play at La Crosse Logan before going to or hosting River Valley on Friday nights, and then a week from Thursday at Richland Center, where, again, River Valley, Richland Center, the two teams at the bottom of the conference, those are certainly winnable games, but interesting matchups with Cuba City. I think that should be a pretty darn competitive game between the Hillman and the Cubans. And then looking at La Crosse Logan, their overall record is 5-15, but they are also a Division II team. So, I would anticipate that Platteville, has a pretty good shot just based on records, but still a tough challenge anytime that you're, playing up, a tougher division and playing, a school, in a bigger city like La Crosse.
And also the fact, keep in mind, they'll be playing the night after they play Cuba City. So, those are both, if Logan were to win that game, that wouldn't be an incredible shock. Platteville should be favored in that game, but that's that remains to be seen if that pans out or not. And of course, it's big for Platteville these last three games before the seeding meeting, which is next weekend. So Platteville's got a lot of incentive, obviously, but that's how things. Sometimes it doesn't turn out quite the way you think it should.
Exactly, and we will have Platteville at Cuba City again coming up on Monday night on Extreme 107.1 and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Let's look at the Six Rivers West, where Highland and Belmont had their rematch from earlier this season. And like the first matchup, it was very much a rock fight in the second matchup as well. Highland defeating Belmont 30-29. It was a late free throw that gave Highland the win. Highland now in first place alone with a 7-1 conference record. Highland's only conference loss came to River Ridge, who, oh, by the way, plays at Highland on Friday night. We'll have that game on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Still kind of this round robin, type of scenario, Steve, where, a Highland win over River Ridge essentially clinches it for the Cardinals, but River Ridge, having beaten Highland before, they won at River Ridge, did the Timberwolves, but that was also a game where Highland did not shoot free throws well at all in that game, as River Ridge was in foul trouble, especially early on in that matchup. I'm very curious to see how this rematch shakes out, and that's really that last domino to fall to determine how the conference is going to shake out.
It is, and there's each of the teams in that conference has kind of issues that are not, to the point where they're not a team that you look at and say that they're automatically, going to go deep in the postseason like Highland did a couple of years ago. There's just, for a variety of reasons, there's just something missing in some of the cases. Now, obviously, you play you play the players you have. It's not like you can, bring somebody else in, but I think one of the things that's particularly interesting about that matchup, or how things turn out, is to keep in mind Highland and River Ridge are in the same sectional, so they could end up facing each other for the third time. But Belmont is in a different sectional, so That conceivably, obviously there's a possibility that you could see two teams from the Six Rivers West make a deep postseason run, or you could see Belmont possibly running into either Argyle Pecatonica or Albany Monticello in the postseason. So we'll see as the phrase goes. But this last couple of weeks is going to be fun to watch, certainly.
Yeah, and River Ridge played a very interesting game against Galena last week, where River Ridge did lose 55-47 to Galena, but River Ridge was led in scoring by Mandy Worley with 24 points. She was 8 of 12 from the three-point line in that matchup. And as we've seen, River Ridge on the girls' side throughout the season, they live and die by the three offensively. And of course, with Joe Schulte on the sideline, they're going to be defensively sound. It's just when you live and die by the three, that's how River Ridge, generates their offense. And, for Highland, I'm sure Coach Terrell has been emphasizing free throws pretty much since that game against River Ridge. And of course, a big free throw against Belmont was what decided the game at the end of regulation. So very curious to see how this rematch goes, as both teams do seem to be playing a little bit better, but both teams also certainly with holes in their game that can be exploited. It's just can those teams expose those weaknesses in their matchups head to head. And again, we have that big matchup coming up on Friday night on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Also, River Ridge hosting Lancaster in non-conference girls matchup Tuesday night on 97.7 Country WGLR and the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube channel. Since we were talking about Galena, let's talk about the Galena Pirates in the NUI West. Galena, of course, 8-0 in conference play, 24-1 overall. Took care of River Ridge Scales Mound last week. River Ridge Scales Mound now 5-3 in conference play, tied with East Dubuque with that 5-3 conference record. B goes on for Galena. They were tested against the River Ridge, Wisconsin team earlier in the week, but then on Wednesday really took care of River Ridge Scales Mound and have certainly separated themselves, from the conference. They're going to win the conference title. Talk about the Galena Pirates and what you've seen from the NUI West.
Well, there's no real surprise about Galena. As you pointed out, that was kind of an interesting result with Galena and River Ridge, but then 2 nights later they played River Ridge Scales Mound, and that was really not a ball game after about the first quarter. Galena's thing is actually, that River Ridge game kind of showed it in the sense that Galena is just suffocating on defense. They are, and there are some, teams that maybe give up fewer points a game. River Ridge Scales Mountain is an example, but if you watch Galena play, they are getting at loose balls all the time. They're getting those 50-50 balls. They're basically letting the teams that they play get one shot off at a time, and they're just relentless. I mean, their defense is just, you just kind of wonder how teams, will be able to score points when you consider how Galena plays defense. And everybody knows that in the postseason, when, you can have bad nights shooting, you can have bad nights handling the ball and all that, but defense is what's going to save the bacon, and Galena's got it. So, and the other thing, we mentioned this before also, that even though on Wednesday it was kind of the more traditional, the big three, they've had games where the big three wasn't necessarily involved in the big finish. That's what happened when they played River Ridge Scales Mound the first time, that there was a late 8-0 run, and it was the points were by 2 freshmen on that team. So that's difficult when you're focusing on, among other things, it's difficult to focus on 3 players. It's one thing to say, we got to stop him or her or them, but you got 3, and then all of a sudden here are the couple of freshmen who are beating teams. So, I don't see unless there's some kind of freak night, I don't see anybody touching Galena until they get to Bloomington. I'll just lay it out like that.
Yep, and you did mention that the pairings came out for the Illinois side of things for the girls, and you want to run down what the potential pathway looks like for Galena when the postseason begins?
Yeah, well, it starts Saturday, and the local game that's going to be Saturday is, as soon as I find it, okay, River Scales Mountain. They got a number 3 seed, and they will be hosting Milledgeville on Saturday. Then the winner of that will play actually they will be playing either West Carroll or Polo the following Monday. River Scales Mountain's going to be favored there, and I think they're a good shot. At least up to the regional final when number 2 seed Eastland comes up. So that could be, that'll be a challenge for them. But they're in a different regional, fortunately for them, from Galena. Galena is going to be waiting for the winner of Forston and Warren. That's a 9-7 matchup. And then on the other hand is Pearl City against Stockton, and that winner is going to be playing East Dubuque. So if I had to guess, you probably think that the regional final is probably going to be a third matchup, actually maybe more than that, between Galena and East Dubuque. And obviously Galena is going to be favored there. East Dubuque is certainly not a bad team, but you have to play the defensive game of your life, basically, to have a chance of beating Galena when you know that Galena is going to play, suffocating defense against you.
Yeah, very much a steal, score, repeat type of defense that Galena's been running. Having watched that game when they played at River Ridge last week, I mean, River Ridge just could not get anything, any real offensive continuity outside of Mandy Worley hitting, 8 of 12 3-pointers. I mean, that pretty much kept River Ridge in that game. But boy, they are just relentless on defense. Like you said, they looked pretty darn impressive. And we kind of know what their path now looks like for the postseason run on the Illinois side. Let's go back.
Sorry, just one other thing. When you play, Galena, kind of interestingly, isn't that good a shooting team, but they are good at rebounding, so that kind of makes up for that. And of course, I think we've seen this before, that you see teams that rely on the 3 going into the postseason. Well, at some point, you're going to be going into unfamiliar gyms. But on the other hand, you also could have situations where it's just not working that night, for you shooting wise. And if you're relying on the 3, the old phrase, teams that live by the 3 sometimes die by the 3. And a lot of times that happens in the postseason. It is still, who's playing the best defense. And then the other thing is who's also executing on the half court. And although Galena certainly relies on the steal and score for a lot of their offense, they're still pretty decent in the half court. But again, they play, tremendous defense. So there you go.
Yep, exactly. Let's move into the Six Rivers East, where again, the 2 co-ops, Argyle Pecatonica and Albany Monticello, are at the top of the conference. Argyle Peck 6-0 on the season, 18-1 overall. Albany Monticello 5-1 in conference play. They're only lost to Argyle Pecatonica and an 18-2 overall record, and they have certainly separated themselves from the rest of the conference. Barneveld, Blackhawk, and Judah, all with losing overall records. Barneveld 3-3 in conference play. And then the Ridge and Valley, Wazeeka Steuben, undefeated 10-0 in the Ridge and Valley Conference, 16-2 overall. Kickapoo in second place with an 8-2 conference record, 16-5 overall. Kickapoo, a sectional qualifier last year, they lost to Belmont in the sectional final last year. But boy, what a season Wazeeka Steuben is having. And they just came off a big win against River Ridge on Friday night, defeating the Timberwolves 73-47. The only losses that Wazeeka Steuben had were to Belmont on January 29th, a 48-40 loss in that one. And then they also lost to Highland back on December 18th, 36-35. So Wazika Steuben having quite the season and seem to be playing their best basketball heading down the home stretch. The 2 wins against Kickapoo. As I look up the schedule here, the first matchup on January 11th, a 48-43 win for the Hornets, and then the rematch will be coming up on February 9th. So the Hornets playing great basketball. Again, only 2 losses on the season. What a turnaround they had from last year to this year, and still not ranked in Division 5 in the latest rankings, although there's a lot of great teams in Division 5, especially in our corner of the state. But looking at the 2 co-ops in the Six Rivers East and the season that Wazika Steuben has had, those 3 teams at some point, any combination of them are going to run into each other. You would think, to determine a sectional game or a potential game to set up a trip to state.
And that's right. And once whoever comes out of there, I think a team that's probably lurking is Royal, because they are ranked 6th in the WIS Sports poll. So that might be they'll be the most difficult, I think, team that they would, most likely team, I think, that they would play going in for the possibly for a trip to state. But yeah, I don't know that Wazika Steuben was really thought of as being a team that was going to have the kind of season that they've had to this point. It is probably revealing that they have lost 2 games to Six Rivers West teams, who are, in the race for the title, obviously. And I think another meeting might be real fun to watch with those teams. And everybody is probably happy in that grouping that they will not have to play Argyle, Pecatonica, or Albany Monticello, because they are in the different sectional.
Right.
And, that, by the way, those 2 teams play Tuesday, Argyle, Peck, and Albany Monticello. And one of those teams, their only loss is to the other. So that is, I guess we'll see, similar to the Mineral Point Darlington game of last week, we'll see, or the Cuba City Mineral Point game at the start of the week, girls game, who's really on top in that conference this week.
Yeah, very intriguing how those 3 teams, the 2 new co-ops. It's always interesting when you start a co-op, how well, that transition is going to be, if they're going to, play well. But boy, have they done exceptionally well, during the season. And then, of course, the turnaround that Wazika Steuben had. I don't know if anyone really anticipated them to be as hot as they have been this season, just, with the way that last season went for them, but having themselves quite the season, and certainly very much a threat in Division 5. Let's now move into your high five, Steve. Let's start with the girls first, since we missed the boys when we talked about the boys earlier, but we'll go girls first. Run down your newest high five, because a lot of basketball's happened since we did our last high five, and you have certainly changed the order on both of them. Let's go with the girls first.
All right. Well, in 5th place, as the team we just mentioned, was Wazika Steuben, just 2 losses this year, and neither in the conference. Albany Monticello is in 4th because they're in 2nd place for now. Cuba City, I guess you convinced me last week. And besides that, in beating Mineral Point, and also when you consider the teams that they have lost to, I think that they are deserving of where they are right now. Argyle Pecatonica, because they beat Albany Monticello for the first time, but that whole thing could flip after Tuesday. But I do still think the team that is number 1 in this whole area is clearly Galena. And they are the one team out of that list that you look at and say, if they don't get to state, I will be shocked. They're simply better than everybody else in Northwest Illinois. And if you look at them, they beat River Ridge, they beat Cuba City earlier this season, and they're just how many teams brought back 3 all-state guards,
right,
from last season? That tells you everything you need to know right there, basically.
Yeah, and I think that the order is about right. Although the thing that I do want to see, I would love to see a Cuba City versus Argyle Pecatonica matchup. I would love to see those two teams go head to head. I think that would be a very good measuring stick just to see how good both of those teams are. Again, Cuba City's losses to Beaver Dam, the number 4 ranked team in Division II, Oregon, the number 2 ranked team in Division I, Galena, number 1 ranked team in Class 1A in Illinois, and a loss to Arrowhead, number 3 team in Division I. I mean, those are about as quality losses as you can have. And I know that I kind of gave you grief about Mineral Point being in the high five, last week and, a couple weeks prior to that. But, give Mineral Point credit. They hung with Cuba City. It was a loss in overtime for the Pointers, but Cuba City getting that win. And I think that the order is about right on the girls' side. I would probably think that Argyle Peck could beat Cuba City head to head, so I don't have any qualms about that. But boy, that would be a fun matchup to see if they could go head to head. Let's go to the boys' high five, where by my count, there's more than 5. Let's lay that one out.
Well, I think when I tell you what it is, then you will understand. Tied for 5th, Ithaca and North Crawford, because, well, they're tied in their conference right now. Potosi, even if they lost to River Ridge, I look at that, that's just a rivalry game. And their other losses are to very good teams, in fact, that are in this high five. Platteville, they just keep rolling, and their two of their 3 losses are to teams also in this high five. And then tied for 1st, because you tell me who's better, Darlington and Mineral Point. They've each beaten each other. Mm-hmm. And I guess my guess is that they will probably decide it for real somewhere in the postseason.
Recency bias says Darlington, because Darlington did have the most recent victory, so I would probably put them ahead of Mineral Point in that regard. But yeah, I think that the high five for the boys also looks good on my end. I don't have any real grievances or anything against it. I think that that meshes out. One of the things that we mentioned with. Oh, go ahead.
Actually, maybe I'll mention what you just were going to mention. But oftentimes, 2 teams in a conference, and we've seen this actually several times this year. Platteville girls, they went to Prairie du Chien, beat them handily. They went to Dodgeville and beat them handily. Prairie came back to Platteville and was not happy and really thoroughly handled Platteville. A lot of times, you provide the motivation for your opponent by beating them the first time, especially if it's a game that, well, we really didn't do this well, whatever this happens to be. Rebounding, for instance, when Platteville played Prairie the first time. So I understand what you're saying about that, most recent win thing. But I don't know. It seems to me that a lot of times that it's hard to maintain the intensity against a team you're playing twice that is really good, especially if you got to go there. It's kind of funny how the Platteville Prairie thing was the home court disadvantage, apparently. But, I don't know. It seems to me that Mineral Point winning the first time, Darlington comes around. They haven't lost to anybody except for Mineral Point, and the game's in Darlington. Darlington would have had to have been favored in that game. And that's really how it turned out. So I maintain what I said about it. They're really as far as I'm concerned, it's a coin flip between those 2 teams as to who's better.
Yep, and we talked about this with Mark Evenstad earlier when we were recapping the SWAL boys and girls games earlier. The path for Mineral Point and Darlington in the sectional, it's going to be them, 1 or 2, and we have to decide who the 3rd best team is in that half sectional, because if you look at the records of everyone else in that sectional or in that half sectional, all the other teams that they're grouped with are under 500 right now. So it's a very interesting thing where I don't think anyone else in that half sectional is going to really pose a threat. And I think that those two are going to be seeing each other in the sectional semifinal. It's currently slated for being played at Lancaster. I don't see that location moving, but should be. It seems like those two are going to be on a collision course because I don't think anyone's really going to derail them during the postseason. There are some interesting games for both Mineral Point and Darlington the rest of the way. Of course, Mineral Point taking on Potosi on Monday night. That's a very interesting matchup. And then Darlington has a game against West Salem at Prairie du Chien on Monday night as well. And then a matchup with Monroe down the home stretch of the season as well. So it's very interesting how I'm curious to see how the season finishes. Are the records gonna hold serve, and how do you decide who's 1 and 2? That's the first part, although I don't know if it's necessarily going to matter because I don't think anyone in that half sectional is going to put a competitive game against those two teams. I don't think anyone there has played consistently enough to show that they're really any threat to the likes of Darlington and Mineral Point, and those two have certainly proven that they are two of the top teams in the state in Division 4.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious. It has become obvious, I think, that the best team not named Darlington and Mineral Point in the SWAL is Southwestern. Well, guess what? Southwestern isn't going to play them because they're in Division 5.
Right.
Yeah, you're right. You look at that, it's like, well, who else? Polaris, maybe, but you're absolutely right. They are the best two, and it's not even close, as far as who else, is there. So it's, I guess, make your plans for wherever Darlington met. Actually, honestly, make your plans for Darlington and Mineral Point in the sectional semifinal. That would be my guess. And that's not even using very many brain cells to figure that out.
Right. Yeah. Although, weird things happen. We don't anticipate weird things happening. They haven't happened yet, but we'll see how the rest of the season shakes out. There's still quite a bit of basketball in these final 2 to 3 weeks of the regular season, and then of course the postseason. We've seen some crazy stuff happen in the postseason, but if this isn't what ends up happening, this would probably be the craziest postseason that we've seen because my gosh, Darlington and Mineral Point, both teams very deep, both teams coached very, very well. And it's just criminal that they have to play in a sectional semifinal, that two of the best teams have to play each other at that stage in the postseason. And it's not going to be played at the Kohl Center, although I would love to see an exhibition match between the two if they would allow them to do so on the biggest stage.
Yeah, I mean, the reality of it is that this is an argument for wider seating, and I know that the reason they don't seed wider is because they don't want, the WIAA doesn't want a situation where, as an example, I'm not even sure what a comparable size team, but somebody having to drive 3 hours to Darlington for a postseason game.
Right.
But honestly, you could put Darlington or Mineral Point probably in any other sectional and they'd win it. That's right. How good those two teams are this year. And yeah, you're right. And this is it's not like this hasn't happened before. But it is a situation certainly where, one of the best teams in the entire state, maybe one of the two best teams in the entire state isn't even going to get out of the sectional semifinal. That's too bad for them.
Yeah. Yep. And for what it's worth, that's where Mineral Point season has ended. The last 2 seasons has been in the sectional semifinal, although both of them were to Onalaska Luther. But a conference rival in the sectional semifinal, certainly a game that they know that they can win because they have beaten Darlington earlier this season. Well, thank you, Steve, for your insight and your thoughts and your well-constructed high five for this week's episode of the High School Sports Roundup. And we'll have another episode of the High School Sports Roundup next week. Thanks for joining us on the Queen Bee Radio Sports YouTube and SoundCloud channels.